What if the skies have always remembered what we forgot? What if the clouds still carry the sound of the first cry that ever rose from earth to heaven? And what if the rain, gentle as it falls, is not a blessing at all, but a memory of judgment weeping through time, beneath a sky that has not yet cracked open before the waters ever dared to rise? There was a silence, and not the kind of silence that comforts. It was the kind that listens, the kind that waits, the kind of silence that hums with warning. There was no thunder then, no ripples yet in the sand, but something old, older than man, older than mountains, had begun to stir. It whispered not in words but in weight, a heaviness pressed against the bones of the world, as if even creation was holding its breath. The earth had grown loud in those days, but not with prayer. The soil, once kissed by angel feet, now soaked in blood. Giants walked the valleys, their shadows stretching farther than the sun could chase, and the hearts of men had turned to stone. Not all at once. No, corruption never begins with a roar. It starts with forgetting the taste of gratitude, forgetting the hush of dawn prayer, forgetting that breath itself is borrowed. And so they lived louder and more carelessly. Drums replaced thicker. Wine drowned out the warnings. Stone altars rose, but not for God. They had made gods of themselves, and above them the watchers watched, those angels who had once guarded the gates of the high realms. Their wings still glowing faint with the memory of heaven, but their eyes, oh, their eyes had drifted downward, to the women, to the world, to flesh. What happens when even angels forget? The story we begin tonight is not merely about water. It is about forgetting who we are. It is about the fall not of rain but of remembrance, and what the sky must do when the earth forgets how to kneel. But before the flood, before the rising, before the drowning, there was a man, not a warrior, not a king, not a man of power but of prayer. His name was whispered through the stars before he ever took his first breath. Noah. He was born in a time when silence was rare, when the world had grown so loud in its rebellion even heaven turned away. But Noah's heart was carved from another stone, one not found in valleys or palaces. It was shaped in solitude, formed in longing. As a child, they say he would sit alone by the rivers listening, not to the water but to the spaces between its murmurs. He heard things others could not, or perhaps things they had forgotten how to hear. The sky loved him. The winds would soften as they neared him. The birds would circle not for food but for peace. He did not preach at first. He prayed, long, quiet prayers, as if he were trying to remind the earth what mercy sounded like. But the more he prayed, the more the world seemed to forget. It is a strange thing when the holy become strangers in their own land, when the pure begin to feel like intruders in a world that once sang their name. Noah's eyes held the grief of generations. He watched his people trade truth for spectacle, watched daughters become ornaments, watched sons become tyrants. He wept, but not because he was weak. He wept because he still believed, even when the rest no longer did. It is here, right here, where the flood truly begins, not with storms, but with the tears of a prophet, not with thunder, but with a single man whispering prayers to a sky that had not yet decided if it would answer. So he rose, one man against a tide of forgetting, one voice in a world that no longer listened. And he spoke, not to scold but to awaken, not to frighten but to remind. He told them of what they had once known of the Creator, the Most High, the one who watches in silence but does not sleep. He reminded them of the covenant buried in their bones, of the dust that once bowed when it was first shaped by divine breath. But they laughed. Oh, how they laughed. The giants mocked his frail form. The nobles turned their backs. Even his own kin questioned the trembling in his voice, but Noah kept speaking, because sometimes the echo of truth is more powerful than the roar of lies. And somewhere beyond the stars, the heavens listened, even if the world did not. And the silence above began to shift, just slightly, just barely, but enough. Enough for the skies to whisper to the winds, "It is nearly time, not yet but almost." And beneath that same sky Noah knelt again, his forehead pressed to the cold, forgiving earth, And his heart, still soft, still aching, still faithful, called out one more time, "Oh my Lord, I am alone, but you are enough." If you're still listening, perhaps this story found you for a reason. Tell me where you're hearing it from tonight. The days pass like shadows drifting over ancient stones, soft, slow, unnoticed by those who no longer looked toward the light. The sun still rose, but the hearts of men did not. And while the world danced in defiance, a single soul built in silence. Noah had been shown the dream, not in thunder or lightning, but in the stillness that follows deep prayer when the soul feels like it is listening from behind the veil. There was no voice, only knowing. A shape unfolded in his mind, massive, curved, sacred. A vessel not born of earth but gifted from beyond it. The ark he did not question. The faithful rarely do. He woke at dawn the next day, his hands trembling with purpose. And he began to gather wood. The people watched him with a bemused cruelty. "What are you doing, old man?" They laughed. "There is no sea here. Has the desert driven you mad?" But he said nothing. He did not answer fools with fury. He answered with wood and sweat and patience. Every plank he laid was a prayer, every nail a testament. And still there had been no rain, not a single drop, only sun and mockery. The ark rose slowly, a giant womb of salvation cradled in dust. Its ribs curved toward the sky like open arms. Children threw stones at it. Men spat near its edges, but Noah kept building. And every night when the stars returned to watch him, he would sit beside the half-formed hull and whisper aloud to the darkness, "If this is what you asked of me, I will not turn away." He aged in that dust, his hands calloused, his bones heavy, but his eyes, they never dimmed. They say even the wind grew softer when it passed him. But what broke him most were not the strangers. It was the faces he loved, familiar ones that turned away. A son who scoffed, a cousin who whispered, "You shame us." A brother who once prayed beside him, now silent in pride. This is the secret burden of prophets. They do not only carry revelation, they carry rejection. He did not ask for followers, he asked for hearts. And hearts in that age were made of stone. Still Noah prayed. He prayed through splinters. He prayed through solitude. He prayed through days that looked the same over and over as the ark slowly rose behind him like a forgotten monument. But heaven had not forgotten. Above, in realms the eyes of men cannot pierce, the watchers stirred. Those angels who had once gazed down upon earth with sorrow now gazed with regret, for many of them had fallen, not in battle but in desire. Their love for creation had turned into lust for it. They descended in secret, took daughters of men as wives, taught forbidden things, how to conjure, how to wound, how to dominate. And from this unholy union the giants were born. Nephilim, born of heaven's spark but earth's rage, too tall for the cities, too hungry for the earth. They drank blood, tore trees from their roots, made war for sport. The world trembled beneath their steps. And the angels who had once sung hymns in the halls of heaven now walked in silence, ashamed. Their leader Azazel watched from the mountain's shadow. He had not repented. Not fully. Instead, he lingered between realms, haunted by his own magnificence, yet cursed by his own pride. And the Most High watched. He watched the blood that soaked the ground, the cries of the innocent swallowed by laughter. He watched the giants laugh at mercy. And the men forget they were made of dust and soul, but still he waited, because the divine does not rush. Even wrath, when sacred, is patient. Noah's prayers reached the throne. Every word, every tear, every breath breathed in submission, they rose like incense. And so the decree was given, quietly, without trumpet or flare. But the sky began to change. At first it was just the light, soft gray, not cloudy but heavy, like the air had swallowed a secret it could not hold. Then came the silence. Birdsong stilled. The winds retreated. Even the insects seemed to vanish. A deep, eerie hush fell over the land, the kind that makes even beasts lift their heads and listen. Noah stood at the edge of the ark, his hands trembling not with fear but with recognition. He had waited for this moment for years, and now it had arrived. The sky was pregnant with judgment, still no rain, but the earth knew, the trees leaned, the animals stirred. Then in the dream that night the order came, gather them, 2 by 2, the innocent, the pure, the silent companions of man, and they came. From forest, from hill, from desert, as if guided by a mercy deeper than instinct. Lions walked beside lambs, wolves did not growl, birds flew in slow, reverent circles, even the serpents did not hiss. Noah opened the ark's great mouth and they entered, not rushed, not fearful, but solemn, like they too knew. His sons helped him, some with heart, some with doubt, but the work was done. The doors creaked, the last nail sealed, and still no rain. The people watched from afar, confused. "What madness is this?" they whispered. "He builds a coffin of wood for ghosts that never come." But above them, in realms unseen, a tear fell from the eye that sees all, and the sky took its first breath to weep. It did not begin with a storm, not the kind that frightens children or rattles shutters. It began quietly, so quietly that no one noticed. The first drop fell from a sky heavy with waiting. It landed on stone, unseen, unheard, like a tear on a prophet's cheek. Then another. And another, but the people did not yet worry. They had seen rain before, but they had not seen heaven remember. Noah stood at the threshold of the ark, his fingers tracing the wooden frame, his eyes lifted not to the clouds, but to the one behind them. The rain slid down his face, but he did not blink. He only whispered, "It has begun." The animals inside grew restless, not from fear but recognition. Even beasts know the weight of divine command. Outside, the mockers began to shift uncomfortably. "It will pass," they said, but their voices lacked certainty. Laughter had grown thin, and still the rain fell, soft but endless. The ground, once cracked and dry, began to darken. Pools formed like mirrors, reflecting the faces of those who had never bowed. Then the sky opened, not in anger but in release, as though it had held its breath for too long, as though it could no longer bear to watch. The rain poured, not like water but like memory. Every drop a reminder of what was lost, of what was warned, of what was ignored. The wind arrived next, howling not wildly but with sorrow. It tore through the tents, unraveled the garments of the proud, pulled down banners raised to false gods. The people ran, but where could they go? The valleys flooded, the rivers rose, the ground itself seemed to rebel. And Noah's heart broke, because prophets do not rejoice in justice. They weep for the mercy that was refused. Inside the ark, darkness settled. Not despair, just stillness. Holy, aching stillness. He lit no fire, there was no need. The ark glowed with remembrance, a glow that came not from flame but from faith. The wood creaked like it was breathing, as if the ark itself knew it had become a womb. Outside, chaos, screams, banging on the sealed doors. "Let us in, forgive us. We believe now." But the time for belief had passed. The door had not been closed by Noah. It was sealed by the one who speaks only once when the decree is final. No man could open it, no angel could reverse it. Noah trembled behind the walls, not from fear, but from the weight of hearing voices he could not answer. How does a prophet bear the sound of drowning prayers? He fell to his knees, not in pride but in pleading. Even now he prayed for them. "O Lord, if there is still light in their hearts, spare them." But silence replied, not cruel silence, sacred silence. The kind that falls when destiny has already been written. The ark lifted. Gently at first, like a leaf on a rising stream. Then higher and higher. The mountains vanished beneath waves. The forests bowed and disappeared. The temples built by ungrateful hands crumbled like dust. And yet the stars still shone above the storm, watching. Because even judgment exists beneath the gaze of the divine. Inside the ark, time slowed. Noah sat in the center, his back resting against the belly of the vessel. Around him, silence except for the soft breathing of beasts. A lion nestled near a lamb. A raven tucked its head beneath its wing. Even the serpent slept without coil. Peace, deep and reverent, sank into the wooden bones of the ark, and for 40 nights the sky did not sleep. It cried, not in rage but in lament, not in punishment but in purification, because sometimes a world must be emptied so it can remember how to be full. Noah never stopped praying, not once, even when the rain was loud, even when the thunder shouted, Even when the cries from beyond the walls grew fewer and then stopped, he still prayed, because prayer is not for changing fate. It is for surviving it. The ark drifted, no direction, no anchor, only surrender, and above the waves the throne watched, not coldly, not distantly, but with the grief of a creator whose creation chose forgetfulness over faith, until finally the sky exhaled and the rain ceased just like that. No trumpet, no signal, only stillness. As if the heavens, having wept all they could, had gone quiet to rest. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction. No land, no sound, just water. And memory, inside the ark, Noah rose. He placed his palm on the curved wall, closed his eyes, and whispered, "You have not forsaken us." A whisper carried upward to the one who never forgets, even when the world drowns in its own forgetting. And so ended the beginning. But the story was only just taking breath. Some say water cleanses all things, that it washes the earth pure, that it drowns the past and leaves no trace. But the sky knows better, and so does the sea. For beneath every wave is a memory, and the flood, though it swallowed voices and cities and giants, could not silence what the bones remembered. The ark floated now over silence, not the silence of sleep, but the silence after burial. All that once defied was gone. The towers men had built to reach heaven now lay broken, their stones scattered like forgotten prayers. The cities of the giants, where laughter once mocked the prophets, now rested at the bottom of the deep, entombed in silt and sorrow. And still the ark moved. It moved without sail, without oar, without direction from man. For when the earth is judged, the only compass is obedience. Noah rose each morning before the sun. He stood in the narrow corridor of the ark, his forehead touching the wood, his whisper the same each day, "Guide us where you will." And though no voice answered, the vessel always moved. It moved as if called by something unseen, as if the waters themselves bowed before a sacred current. Inside, the days were slow, measured by the quiet rhythm of breath and prayer. His family spoke little, not out of fear, but reverence. They had witnessed the sky open like a wound. They had heard the cries. They had felt the vessel lift when the world sank, and something in them had shifted. They no longer spoke of land. They no longer asked, "When will this end?" They simply watched Noah and waited. Sometimes at night, he would sit at the very front of the ark where the walls curved like a cradle, and he would listen. Not to the water, but to what lay beneath it. He could hear it faintly, like echoes beneath skin, the bones of the world speaking, not in words but in memory. And they said, "We are still here." Because water may bury, but it does not forget. The bones of the giants, too heavy to float, rested in the deep, their hands still clenched, their skulls still turned toward heaven. Even in death their pride remained. And the angels who had fallen, the watchers, where were they? Not in the ark, not among the saved. They had fled before the rains came. Some say they tried to climb to the mountains, higher than the floodwaters could reach. Others say they dug deep, hiding in caves, clinging to darkness. But all who knew heaven's light and turned from it are never truly hidden. The divine sees even in shadow. And so it was written, their names were struck from the heavenly scrolls, not erased, but sealed, to be remembered only as warnings. And Noah, he did not ask where they had gone. He knew. The fall of angels is never upward, it is always into silence. Still the ark carried on. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. The food remained. The animals remained calm. There were no plagues, no rot. No fear, because where faith lives, decay cannot root. And each night Noah would raise his hands in the dark and say, "If this is punishment, it is mercy. If this is trial, it is love. If this is exile, then you are still near." And his Lord heard him, not with ears, but with knowing, the kind of knowing that shaped stars and breath and sorrow. So the sea cradled the ark gently, as if to say, "You have not been forgot." And the bones below the waves grieved, not for life, but for the light they had turned away from. Because even in the deepest drowning, there is still a flicker of what was lost. And that flicker burns, quiet, cold, forever. Far beneath the drifting ark, beyond the bones of giants and the ruins of forgotten cities, there rose a peak, not one carved by kings or storms, but by decree. Mount Judy. It stood silent beneath the sky, cloaked in mist and time as if waiting for a promise, not a mountain of grandeur but of purpose. Its ridges had known no footsteps, its stones had not yet echoed with prophecy. But the mountain had been chosen, long before Noah, long before the flood, long before the first drop kissed the earth. It waited, because even mountains can be written into destiny. The ark drifted closer, though Noah did not know. He still knelt each dawn, his hands folded with humility, his back curved like the hull of the vessel itself, bent under the weight of trust. Inside, the air had changed. The animals had grown still, not sick, not restless, just still, as if the breath of the flood had reached its final sigh. Noah's wife, graceful and quiet, moved between the creatures each day, her hands leaving behind calm. His sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth spoke only when needed, and even then they whispered. The ark was no longer a ship. It had become a sanctuary, and sanctuaries do not echo with noise, only with remembrance. But even in peace, the human heart wonders. One evening, as Noah gazed into the endless blue, Japheth came and sat beside him. He did not speak at first. He simply watched his father's hands, worn, lined, still. Then he asked, "Will we ever walk again?" Noah did not answer quickly. He let the question settle. He looked out at the water, the same water that had drowned every defiance, every arrogance, every refusal to kneel. And then he said, "The earth is not gone, only hidden, and what is hidden is not lost." Japheth nodded, though his young eyes still held wonder. He had never known the world before the rain, not truly, and so he dreamed of it. But Noah remembered. He remembered the scent of soil, the hush of wind through palm branches, the sound of a well being drawn at dawn, and he remembered the cries, the eyes that begged too late, the children who clung to their mothers as the water rose. So when he prayed, it was not for land. It was for mercy, that when land returned, he would be worthy to step upon it. And still the ark moved, but the wind was shifting, softer now, less like judgment, more like guidance. The clouds had begun to thin. The sun, after so many veiled days, broke through in trembling beams. The sea glistened not with chaos, but with promise. Then one night as Noah slept, he dreamed. Not the scattered visions of fear, but the sacred kind where every image feels like breath. He stood in a desert of stars, alone. Above him, a voice not loud, not sharp, but vast. Soon. That was all, and he woke with tears in his beard, because prophets do not cry from sadness. They cry from recognition. The next day the ark shuddered, not with violence, but with relief. It tilted forward, then stilled. The family gathered. Noah placed his palm to the wall, closed his eyes, and smiled. We have touched the bones of the earth again. They had come to rest, not on accident, not on drift, but precisely where the Most High had written. Mount Judy cradled the ark like a mother cradles a sleeping child. Noah stepped to the door. He did not open it, not yet. He waited for permission. Because even deliverance requires obedience. Instead, he sent the raven. It flew wide and dark, circling above the endless blue. It did not return. Noah waited 7 nights, then sent the dove, and it returned, empty. 7 more nights passed, and again he sent the dove. This time it returned with green, a single leaf, still wet, still trembling. Noah held it in his palms, his chest tightening, not because land had come, but because life had endured. Somewhere beyond the waves, a tree had remembered, and heaven had allowed it to live. He gathered his family, and they knelt, right there inside the ark, surrounded by animals, by quiet, by the memory of a drowned world. They gave thanks, because gratitude must come before ground. And still he did not open the door, not yet, because the flood had ended, but the test had not. The ark was no longer moving. It sat still like a prayer waiting for Ami. Mount Judy held it gently, as if it had always known this would be its burden, to cradle salvation when the world forgot how to breathe. But still, the door remained closed. Noah waited. He had waited in building. He had waited in warning. He had waited through rain, through death, through silence. And now he waited again for the command to rise, because to step before being told is not bravery. It is pride. And Noah had buried his pride long ago. Inside, the air had grown fragrant with stillness. Even the animals had hushed. The lion no longer paced. The birds no longer fluttered. The serpent slept in a coil of trust. Something unseen moved through the air, a feeling, not quite wind, not quite voice, a sacred hush. Then before the sun had fully risen, it came, not in thunder, not in voice, but in permission, a knowing that filled the ribs like breath. A weight lifted so subtly, so quietly, only a prophet would notice. And Noah turned to the door. He placed his palm upon the wood. The same wood his hands had shaped in trembling obedience. He pressed his forehead to it and whispered, "Bismillah, in the name of the one who drowned the world to cleanse it and who now whispers, go." The latch released. It did not creak, it sighed. The door opened not outward, but inward, as if to remind Noah that return begins from within. And light entered, not like a flood, but like the first sunrise, soft, pure, patient. It slid across the floor of the ark, touching the hooves, the feathers, the fur, touching faces still marked by sleep and awe. One by one the animals moved, not rushed, not afraid. They walked as if led by angels, and they stepped onto earth again. Earth wet but living, not ruined, not raging, just quiet, as if it too had held its breath and was only now beginning to exhale. Noah stepped last, not out of hesitation, but reverence. His bare feet touched soil, and he fell, not in weakness, but in sujud. He bowed so low his breath became one with the dust, and he did not rise quickly, because gratitude is not hurried. Behind him his family stood in silence. Before him the mountain rose in humility, and above him the sky, no longer weeping, watched in silence. Then Noah built, but not a home, not yet. He built an altar from the same wood that carried him, the same wood that groaned in the dark, the same wood that remembered every wave, every scream, every prayer. He did not burn it in waste. He offered it back, a portion, a prayer. The scent of sacrifice rose into the morning air, and the earth seemed to hold still again, not in fear but in awe, and the Most High, who needs no scent, no offering accepted. Not because of what was given, but because of how it was given. The heavens were silent, but their silence glowed, and a covenant was written, not in ink, not in stone, but in promise, that never again would the waters rise in wrath, that never again would all the living be swept away. And to mark it the sky bowed, and from its highest arc it drew a bow, not of war, but of remembrance. Colors stretched like breath across the clouds, crimson and gold and violet, all wrapped in a sacred arc. And the rainbow, for the first time in creation, whispered to the world, "He remembers." Noah watched it, his heart quiet, his eyes wet, not from grief, but from the knowing that even after the flood, God still sends beauty. And in that moment, the ark behind him now empty, the sky before him singing in silence, Noah understood. The flood was not only to drown, it was to reveal, to strip the world bare so that faith would be the first thing sown again. He turned to his family, to the open land, to the waiting future, and he spoke his first words on the new earth, "Begin again." The world was quieter now, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes not from peace but from absence. Noah stood alone beneath the vastness, not alone in number, but alone in memory. Because when you have witnessed the world end, no beginning feels simple. The air still smelled of wet wood and earth. The trees had not yet returned. The flowers had not yet dared to bloom. Only the wind moved, carrying the scent of something ancient, ashes not of fire, but of forgetting. He walked slowly, bare feet pressing into soft, reborn soil. The land felt unfamiliar. Not dangerous, just unclaimed. There were no footprints, no villages, no laughter carried on the wind, just sky. And silence. His sons followed behind him, their wives beside them, all quiet. For what words are there after the world drowns? What songs can be sung when even the birds have forgotten their melodies? Noah did not speak. He listened to the hum beneath his feet, to the murmur of trees not yet born, to the earth learning to breathe again. Then he found it, a small hill not far from where the ark rested. There on the rise he knelt. No stones, no fire, no altar, just open sky. And he raised his hands. O Lord, you have spared us not for who we are, but for who you are, let us not forget. Behind him his family knelt too, not because they understood, but because something in them remembered how gratitude is older than speech. They stayed there long, as the sun moved behind drifting clouds, as shadows stretched across the soil. And when they finally rose, there was a new weight in the air, not of fear, not of judgment, but of promise. It came like a wind that touched only the soul, soft but full. And Noah knew the time for covenant had come. He called his sons. They stood in a circle, 4 men whose eyes held the memory of rain and ruin, men who had buried the past not in ground but in obedience. And he said, "You have seen what pride does to the earth. You have seen what forgetting does to the heart. Now remember." He did not raise his voice. He did not command. He spoke like the trees used to speak, low, sacred, remembered. Then, with hands still trembling from years of obedience, he took a stone from the ground, one stone, and placed it upright, a marker, not to claim but to witness, then another and another, until 12 stood rough and unshaped in a circle around them, one for each memory, each prayer, each generation yet unborn. And he named them not after men but after virtues: Sabr, patience; Tawbah, return; Ikhlas, purity; Shukr, gratitude; Tawakkul, trust; Hilm, forbearance; Sid, truthfulness; Adl, justice; Rama, mercy; Taqwa, God consciousness; Khushu, humble awe; Sakina, divine peace. 12 stones, 12 names, each one spoken into the wind like a vow. And he said, "Let this be our covenant, not written on scrolls, but lived, not enforced, but remembered." The stones did not glow. There was no fire, no thunder, only the wind circling gently through the clearing, as if the heavens breathed an amen. And from somewhere behind the veil, the watchers of light looked down and smiled, because true worship is not loud, it is quiet. It is stones on soil, names whispered in trust, and a heart that kneels not out of fear but out of love. That night the stars returned, clearer than before, closer almost, as if they had drawn near to listen. Noah lay upon the earth, his hands behind his head, his eyes toward that great river of light in the sky, and he did not sleep immediately. He thought of those who had mocked him, those who had laughed, those who had drowned. He felt no victory, only ache. He did not ask why he had been chosen. He asked instead, "Am I still worthy to carry what you have trusted me with?" There was no answer, only the hush of night and the quiet rhythm of the stars keeping watch. But he knew, because silence when sacred is not empty, it is full. And so the covenant lived not in fire, not in spectacle, but in a circle of stones that no man would ever write upon. Only remember, even in a world washed clean, shadows return, not as monsters but as memories. Noah woke before the dawn. The stars still glowed, but the edge of the sky had begun to pale. He walked through the dewy field alone, his hands clasped behind his back, his head bowed. He did not look for anything, he listened. For the earth now spoke in a new language, not with thunder or flood, but with whisper. The soil was soft again. The grass, barely born, quivered in the breath of morning. And somewhere far off, the first birds sang, not in song, but in trembling, broken notes, like a melody remembered only halfway. The world was healing, but healing is not forgetting. Noah knew that peace is not inherited, it is built. And what had been destroyed in days would take generations to remember again. He returned to the circle of stones. The 12 markers stood silent. They had not shifted in the night, but the wind was different. It moved not like breath, but like a question. He stood among them and asked softly, "Will they remember?" His sons emerged from their tents, each carrying the silence of a prophet's bloodline. Shem, the steady one; Ham, the spirited one; Japheth, the dreamer. 3 sons, 3 directions, and the future still wrapped in silence. That day Noah gathered them. He did not speak as a father, he spoke as one entrusted with the echo of the flood still in his ears. They sat around the stones and he began, "What you plant now will not bloom for you, but your children will eat its fruit. So choose carefully the seeds you leave behind." His words were not poetic, not lofty. They were the kind of words that dig into the soul the way rain digs into earth. You have been saved by mercy, not because you earned it, but because you carried obedience in a time when the world forgot its name. They nodded, but in Ham's eyes a flicker, not rebellion, but something quieter, a question buried too deep to speak aloud. Noah saw it, but he did not press it, because even a prophet cannot make a heart bow. He can only remind. That evening Ham wandered farther than usual. He walked the hills alone, tracing the horizon with his eyes as if searching for something beyond the mountain's reach. And in the distance he found something. A stone, large, dark, carved, not by nature, by hands, ancient hands. It was half buried in the slope, covered in moss and time, but Ham felt its shape, an altar, not like Noah's, older, colder. There were symbols along its face, faint but present, not words, not names, shapes, eyes. Stars twisted into patterns not born from the heavens. He stepped back, felt something stir in his chest, not fear, curiosity, because even in sacred lands the past lingers. He ran back as the sun began to fall. Noah sat in his tent, reading the scroll of the sky through the flaps. Ham knelt beside him. He did not speak of what he saw, he only asked, "Are we the first to rise again?" Noah looked at him. Long. Soft? No. Silence then, but we are the first who still remember why we fell. Ham nodded, but something in him remained unsettled. The next morning he returned to the altar, alone. This time he traced the carvings with his hand, cold. He thought he heard something, not voice, not word, just pull, and he knelt there, not in worship, not in prayer, but in wonder. And wonder left untended becomes hunger. Back at the camp Noah dreamed. A black river winding through the green. A flame hidden inside a cave. A child touching a crown of bone. He woke before dawn, his breath shallow. He did not speak of the dream. He only prayed longer that day and added a 13th stone to the circle, unnamed. Because some warnings do not need words. The covenant still stood, but even ash remembers fire. And even peace, when forgotten, can become the doorway to fall again. The night was clear, too clear, as if the stars had drawn near not to bless, but to warn. Noah lay awake. The rest of the camp slept, breathing softly, dreaming new earth dreams, but prophets rarely sleep fully. Their rest is a river with one eye open. He rose. Wrapped in his shawl, he stepped out beneath the trembling light. The circle of stones glowed faint in the moon's hush, all 12, and the 13th still unnamed. He knelt beside it, placed his hand on its cold surface, and whispered, "I saw it again." His voice barely touched the air. The dream had returned, a whisper in a foreign tongue. A garden turned to dust, a flame that refused to die. He did not understand all of it, but he knew enough. The flood had ended, but not everything had drowned. Some things cannot be washed away by water. Some seeds hide too deep. Some memories cling to bone. And in one of his sons that seed had stirred. That morning Ham returned again, dust on his feet, eyes distant. He avoided Noah's gaze, averted his face during prayer, lingered at the edges of silence. His brothers noticed. Shem, firm and watchful, began walking with Noah more often. Japheth hummed quiet songs to himself, trying not to see the shift, but the earth sees all. And one night, as the wind rose sharp and sudden, Ham spoke. It was around the fire the family had gathered. No stories were told, only warmth shared. Then Ham looked up. His voice was quiet, too quiet. "Why must we forget what came before?" Noah looked at him, slow, measured. "Because not all memory is sacred." Ham's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. That night he did not return to his tent. He went to the altar, the one buried in the hills, the one the flood had failed to wash away. He knelt there again, closer this time. He placed his hand upon it. The cold no longer startled him, instead it welcomed. And then for the first time he spoke to it, not in words taught by prophets, but in the murmur of curiosity turned hunger. "What power do you carry that my father fears?" The stone did not answer. But the wind shifted, and something beneath the soil moved. Back at the camp, Noah woke with a start. He did not wait. He rose, he wrapped his cloak, and he followed the wind. It led him through the low brush, past the sleeping beasts, past the edge of safety, until he saw it. Ham, kneeling at the altar, eyes closed, hands pressed upon carved ruin. Noah called softly, "Ham." His son turned, not startled, not ashamed, just quiet. "It speaks," he said. Noah stepped closer. "No, it echoes." Ham stood, his hands still cold. "What's the difference?" Noah looked at the altar, long, heavy. "Echoes are what remain when something sacred is removed. They are not voices, they are voids." Ham looked down, then up again. Maybe voids deserve to be filled. Noah stepped between him and the stone, not with force, but with gravity. We were not spared to revive what drowned, we were spared to remember why it drowned. Ham's hands trembled, but he said nothing. Behind them, the wind stilled. The night resumed its hush, and the altar, it faded back into shadow. The next day, Noah returned alone. He placed his hand upon the stone, then he took a tool and marked it, not to destroy it, but to remind. He carved a single word in the script of remembrance. Nisyan, forgetfulness, and beside it in smaller letters, Latia, Arabic Noon, Arabic Sin, Arabica. Do not forget. Then he left it, untouched, unburied, unworshipped. Let it remain as a warning that even in a new world the old shadows wait, not with swords, not with storms, but with memory. And so the covenant held, not because all was pure, but because the prophet remained. And prophets, even when weary, hold the line between remembering and ruin. For the earth had been washed clean, but the ashes beneath still breathed. And only those who remember the fire can keep it from burning again. What happens to angels when they are no longer welcome in heaven? Do they fall like stones, crashing through the sky with thunder and flame? Or do they fall slowly like grief, like memory, like the way a name is forgotten by the one who used to whisper it in prayer? This is the chapter of the watchers. Not all of them drowned, not all of them died. Some they wandered. Long before the rain, long before the ark ever groaned against the tides, there were eyes watching earth not with judgment but with longing. They had names once, beautiful names: Sakil, Cassiade, Barakil, Ramal, angels of high station, guardians of celestial thresholds, but they did not remain guardians. They descended, not because they were sent, but because they chose. And choice for angels is a dangerous thing. They came not with swords, but with affection. And affection unmoored from command becomes rebellion. They loved what they saw, the women, the beauty of earth, the pull of form, and so they taught. They taught what was not meant to be taught. They gave man the secrets of the stars, but not the remembrance of who made them. They gave women the use of colors and charms, but not the knowledge of the one who paints the dawn. They gave warriors the crafting of iron blades, but not the humility of when to sheath them. And what was once divine became distorted. From their union came the giants, the Nephilim, the hungry ones. But when the rain came, it washed them away. The watchers scattered. And now, after the flood, the world whispers again. Not with certainty, not with witness, but with shadow. Some say strange lights moved over the northern hills. Some say a woman saw a figure without footprints passing through olive groves in the dusk. Some say the animals shiver in silence as if something familiar but forgotten moves through the trees at night. Noah does not speak of it, but he feels it. He walks with heavier steps. He watches the sky longer. He listens to the wind more than he used to. Because he remembers their names, the ones that fell. He remembers how they walked like gods but wept like men, how they spoke softly but shook the hearts of nations. And he remembers the last thing one of them said to him long before the rains, a voice that echoed like silver on stone. You pray with a voice heaven hears, but earth does not. That voice has not left him. Sometimes in sleep he hears it behind his dreams, not loud, not angry, just there, waiting. So he walks farther now, beyond the circle of stones, beyond the hills, beyond the reach of his sons. He walks toward the old places, the mountains that once stood witness to forbidden vows, the caverns where stars once flickered against the black like broken halos. One day he finds a tree split down the middle, not by lightning, by heat, not burnt, but opened, its trunk hollowed, its bark carved, not with knife, with finger, long, slender, inhuman. A single line drawn from root to branch, a mark of return. He places his hand upon the tree. It is warm, too warm. And beneath his palm he feels a heartbeat, not of life but of memory, then a whisper, not in his ears, in his chest, not words but a question. Are we forgotten or forgiven? He stumbles back, breathing hard, eyes wet, knees trembling. He says nothing. He returns to camp, quiet, different. He does not tell his sons. He does not tell his wife. He only carves a new symbol into the 13th stone. Not a word, not a name, just a line, straight, downward, ending in a point, the sign of falling. Then he prays, longer than usual, and in his prayer one line returns again and again. Let them not find what they left behind. Because some angels fell in love with earth, and earth still remembers their touch. The morning came cloaked in mist, not the soft kind that warms the skin, but the kind that listens. It hovered over the hills like a question waiting to be answered. Shem rose first. He always did. He walked the boundary of the camp, tracing the lines with silent prayer, a prophet's son who knew that protection begins with remembrance. But something felt wrong. The birds did not sing. The sheep stood still, heads low. Even the river nearby had slowed its rhythm, as if unwilling to move forward. He returned quickly, woke Noah, said no words, just a nod, and Noah understood. Because when a land goes quiet, something has passed through it. Japheth joined them. Together they moved like shadows, 3 generations of vigilance, stalking through wet grass toward the mountain's edge. They came upon the place where Noah had stood days before. The tree, but it was no longer split, it had healed. No mark, no burn, no carving, only bark, smooth and wet like a wound that had decided to forget. But Noah knew. He placed his hand again upon the trunk. This time it was cold, deceptively cold. Like stone left too long in the night, but beneath it, still that faint thrum, like a distant drumbeat muffled beneath years of silence. Shem stepped forward. Is it one of them? Noah said nothing. He only closed his eyes. Japheth stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for a staff, a weapon made not for war but for warning. And then a sound, not from the tree, not from the wind, from the mountain, a low hum, like breath beneath the stone, like something ancient shifting in its sleep. Noah turned to his sons, spoke softly. They never left, only waited. Shem's jaw tight, his eyes scanned the ridges above. Why wait? Noah looked up. The sky had darkened, not with storm but with memory, because they cannot enter what was cleansed until someone invites them back. Japheth paled. Ham. The name dropped like a stone in still water. Noah did not reply. He was already walking, back to camp, back to the place where remembrance meets risk. The 13th stone. It glowed faintly now, not from light, from heat. Someone had touched it. Shem arrived first, his eyes scanning, his fingers tracing the new symbol Noah had carved. Japheth found the footprints, deep, fresh, leading east into the lower valleys. Noah stood at the stone, his hands resting on it like a father steadying a child. He whispered, I warned you, Ham, not with anger, with ache, because every prophet knows the test of obedience never ends at salvation. It begins there. That evening they did not eat. The camp remained in silence. The women gathered quietly. The animals seemed restless, and the stars refused to appear. Instead, a veil of gray spread across the sky, as if heaven itself did not wish to look down. Noah sat beside the fire, not kindled for warmth, but for clarity. He held a piece of bark, the same wood the ark had once been carved from. He watched it burn. The flame danced gently, then flickered, then turned blue, and the scent changed from cedar to something older, something sharp, like incense offered at a forgotten altar. Noah dropped the bark, stomped the flame. His heart beat heavy. They are near. Shem rose. What do we do? Noah looked into the dark beyond the circle of stones. He spoke not to his son but to the night itself. We remember and we refuse to forget. Because forgetting is how they return. They do not need doors. They do not need prayers. They only need forgetfulness. Forget the warning, forget the flood, forget the covenant, and the watchers will walk again. Japheth trembled. But Noah placed a hand on his shoulder. Courage is not in fighting them, it is in not becoming them. And so they stayed awake that night, 3 men wrapped in wool and silence, watching the ridges, waiting not for war, but for the echo of footfalls not meant to return. And far off, beyond the veil of mist, a whisper rose. one that sounded like wings dragging through soil. The next morning was still, not calm, still, the kind of stillness that does not comfort, the kind that waits as if holding its breath. Noah stepped out of his tent before the sun rose. The ground beneath his feet felt warm, too warm for morning. He looked to the east, the ridges where Ham had walked. There was movement there, not the wild kind, not animals, but something slower, deliberate. He did not wake the others, not yet. He walked alone, staff in hand, heart steady. The air grew thick as he climbed. Every breath felt like pulling water through cloth. The trees were quiet, the earth soft beneath his feet. And then he saw it, a clearing he had never known. A ring of stones, large, dark, too smooth to be natural. They pulsed faintly, like breath caught in rock. And in the center, a figure kneeling, Ham, but not just Ham, another, tall, still, wrapped in what looked like linen but darker, like it had been soaked in dusk. No face could be seen, only the outline of something once radiant, now dim. Noah stepped forward. His staff struck a stone and the sound rang like a bell choked by dust. The figure turned, not with surprise, but with familiarity. As if it had been waiting for him, Ham rose. His face pale, eyes wide, caught between awe and fear. He spoke, but his voice cracked. He showed me things. Noah said nothing. The figure did not move, but it spoke not aloud, but into the space behind the ribs, a voice heard only in memory. We did not come to destroy, we came to teach. Noah lifted his staff, and what you taught led to drowning. A pause, then the voice again. They asked, we gave. Is it our fault they burned with what we gave them? Noah stepped forward. You gave without permission, that is the first fire. The figure stood now, taller than any man, not heavy but vast, like a shadow that does not need light to exist. Ham stepped back, his hands trembling. Father, I didn't know, I didn't. Noah touched his shoulder, then looked to the figure. You are not welcome here. The figure did not speak again, but the stones around them pulsed once more, then faded. The warmth in the air vanished. The mist that clung to the ground retreated, and the figure gone, not with a wind, not with sound, just absence, as if it had never been, as if it had only been a memory made real by the weight of human longing. Ham collapsed, not from exhaustion, but from the shattering of illusion. Noah knelt beside him. He did not scold, he did not strike, he only said, they do not need worship to return, only attention. Ham wept, not from shame, but from the ache of having touched what should have remained sealed. And Noah wept too, because this is the curse of the saved, to carry memory, to carry warning, to carry the knowing that even after the world is washed clean, man will still reach for forbidden fire. They returned to camp in silence. Shem met them with wordless understanding. Japheth stood near the 13th stone, his hands folded in prayer. Noah looked at the stone, and now a crack had formed through its center, not from weight, but from witness. That night he gathered his family. He spoke not as a prophet, not as a father, but as one who had seen the sky bleed. They will come again, not with wings, but with wonder, not with swords, but with knowledge dressed in light. He paused. When they do, remember not who they are, but what we became because of them. And then he buried the 13th stone, not to forget, but to protect, because remembrance, when twisted, becomes invitation. And there are some beings who were never meant to walk this earth again, but who wander still, waiting for forgetfulness, waiting for hunger, waiting for a soul to ask the wrong question. The flood was gone, the sky was clear, but beneath the surface, the fire waited. Not the fire of wrath, the other kind, the slow-burning ache that slumbers under roots, that wakes only when a seed forgets its source. It began with planting. Noah's sons, now scattered across the widening land, carved the ground with purpose. Each step they took across the softened earth was a prayer turned into motion. Shem walked east, where the rivers met in quiet conversation. Japheth headed north, toward the rolling hills and cold wind. Ham remained nearby, though his steps had grown quieter since the watcher vanished. Each man dug, their hands in soil, their backs to the sun, their hearts still marked by the ark's breath, and they planted grains, dates, lentils, vines, all gifts remembered from before the waters. Noah watched from a distance. He did not plant, he waited, because before the earth is tilled, the heart must be checked, and his heart felt the tremble. One morning Ham called out, "The vines have risen." Noah walked slowly to his side. The grapes had bloomed faster than expected, heavy, full, dark, the kind of fruit that carries memory in its skin. Ham looked proud, a sign perhaps that the land forgives. Noah said nothing. He knelt, touched the roots. They pulsed, too warm. He plucked a single grape, held it to the light, turned it in his palm. Not all that grows clean. Ham furrowed his brow. "But they came from your seed." Noah nodded slowly. "And still they remember more than we do." That night Ham did not sleep. The grapes called to him, not with sound, with promise, a taste, a forgetting, a slipping into something softer. So he pressed them, crushed them in secret, filtered the juice, left it to rest. Days passed. The scent changed. What had been sweet grew sharp. What had been clear grew dark. And one night he drank. He drank beneath a tree Noah had planted in silence. A tree meant to mark the passage of seasons. A tree whose roots once touched the stones of the ark. The first taste warmed him. The second pulled him. The third, he forgot the sky. He laughed, alone, strange laughter, the kind that echoes not from joy but from loosened memory. He fell asleep beneath the tree, bare, exposed, dreaming of faces he had never seen, of voices that spoke in silver tongues, of light that curved into shadow. And when Noah found him the next morning, the sun still low, the leaves still wet, he wept. Not because his son had fallen, but because the earth had remembered the fire. Noah covered him, wordlessly, gently, with a cloth that had once lined the inside of the ark. Shem and Japheth arrived, their eyes averted, their steps reverent. Noah said only, "Do not look upon what shame has uncovered, only upon what mercy can still cover." They helped him carry Ham back. He did not wake for hours. When he did, he could not meet their eyes. Noah sat beside him, did not scold, did not question, only whispered, "You pressed what was not yet ready. You drank what should have remained seed. This is how the fire returns." Ham looked down, hands shaking. "I only wanted to feel joy." Noah's voice cracked. "Joy is not forbidden, but joy that forgets its place becomes ruin." He stood, left his son in silence. That night he walked alone into the vineyard. He carried fire. One by one he pulled the vines from the soil, their roots deep, twisted. He burned them, not in anger, in mourning, because even in a world remade, desire takes root faster than memory. The fire rose high, but Noah turned his back to it. He prayed toward the stars, toward the mercy that still lingered above. "Do not take us for what we do, take us for what we are trying not to become." And the stars held their silence. But beneath his feet the soil cooled, and the fire turned to ash. For weeks the air smelled of ash, not the ash of judgment but of grief, of vines burned before their time, of fruit that was never meant to become fire. Ham no longer laughed. He walked with eyes cast downward, feet brushing the edge of silence with every step. He did not return to the vineyard. He did not return to the altar in the hills. He did not return to the fire beneath the seed, but something in him still burned. Noah watched, not as a judge, not even as a father. He watched as one who has buried too many worlds to believe healing comes quickly. And the sky remained dry. The rivers ran, the trees bore fruit, but the sky withheld its softness, as if it too remembered. Shem came to Noah one evening, his voice low and hesitant. "Father, the soil is rich, but it does not warm the seed." Noah nodded, because the ground forgets faster than the wind. But the wind still speaks of what it saw. Japheth sat beside them, turning a smooth stone over in his hands. "Should we stop planting?" Noah looked at the horizon. "No, but we must remember what we're feeding." That night smoke returned, not from fire, from incense. A scent not born from the family's hands. It drifted down from the hills, thin as thread, sweet as rot. The animals stirred uneasily. The birds did not sleep. Noah rose. He followed the scent through the trees, Shem and Japheth beside him, quiet, heavy. They reached the place where the vineyard had once stood. The earth was dark, and in the center a single vine, alive. It pulsed faintly, its leaves glistening as if touched by something deeper than dew. Noah bent low, pressed his palm to the soil. It was warm again, not hot, just alive in the wrong way. He whispered, "You burned, but you did not die." Shem stepped forward. "Is it cursed?" Noah shook his head. "Not cursed, remembered." They dug the root out. It fought them, twisted deeper. Clung to stones. Even as they pulled, it hissed. Not with sound, but with resistance. By dawn it was gone, ashes again. But this time Noah buried the ashes, deep. Far from camp, not with stones, with prayer. And above the burial place he planted a fig, because remembrance must be replanted, but not with fruit that makes men forget. Days passed. The wind returned, soft, cool, almost forgiving, but Noah could still feel the soil's heartbeat, beneath the fig, beneath the ground. One morning, as the sun rose silver over the hills, Ham returned to his father, his hair unkempt, his voice dry. He knelt and said, "I remember." Noah said nothing. He simply placed a hand on Ham's shoulder. The weight of mercy is heavier than the weight of punishment. Ham wept, for all the things he had wanted, for all the things he had seen, for all the things he still did not understand. Noah whispered, "The seed is not evil, but the hunger it feeds can be." That night the stars returned, the real ones, not the watchers. The camp slept soundly for the first time in many moons. The sky exhaled. The trees swayed like old men praying in a forgotten language. And the fire finally slept, but even asleep it dreamed. And in the soil the bones of old giants shifted slightly, just enough to whisper, "It is not over." The fig tree grew slowly. Its leaves were soft, its fruit hesitant, as though it knew it had been planted atop the grave of something old and unsleeping. Noah visited it each morning. He never watered it. He only placed his hand upon its bark and whispered the same word, "Remain." Not flourish, not bloom, not rise, just remain. Because in a world still learning to forget its fire, survival is sacred enough. The children of Shem and Japheth played nearby. Laughter returned to the wind in fragments, not fully but like a language relearned by tired tongues. Ham watched from a distance. He no longer sought the hills, no longer pressed fruit into fire, but he did not laugh. He had seen too much of the inside of the flame to trust joy completely. And perhaps that too was a kind of obedience. One day, while Noah walked the lower valley, he came upon stones scattered, chiseled, old, not his. These were remnants of a time before flood, before giants, before even the first altar. Each stone bore a mark, not letters, not curses, but names, long, unfamiliar. He ran his fingers across one, the groove still sharp. Then he saw it, a figure etched in low relief, not of man, not of beast, wings, not high and proud, but torn, bent downward, the watcher, not in glory, in regret. It was kneeling, its hands cupped, its face buried, and below it a vine twisting up its leg, carving into its wing, climbing. Noah closed his eyes. The whisper returned. "We only wanted to teach them to rise." He pressed his palm to the stone, not in defiance, in grief. "But you taught them how to fall." He did not stay long. He marked the place, not with a pillar, with a circle of uncut stones, a warning not to enter, not to forget. He returned home in silence. That night a storm passed overhead, brief. No thunder, only wind and flashes of distant light. But it was not heaven angry, it was heaven remembering. The fig tree stood through it, unafraid, unmoved. And when the morning came, its first fruit had ripened. Noah plucked it, held it, turned it, smelled it. Then he did not eat it, he buried it, because not all fruit is for the tongue. Some is for the soil, some is for the soul, some is just to say, "I still remember who planted me." He called for his sons. They gathered beneath the tree. He handed each a seed, not many, one, and said, "Wherever you go, plant this, but do not ask it to feed you, let it only remind you." They nodded. Shem kissed his father's hand. Japheth placed the seed in a leather pouch. Ham held his longer, staring into its center. Noah looked into his eyes. Not all who fall are evil, but not all who rise are righteous either. Ham bowed his head, and for the first time in months he smiled, faintly, but truthfully. That night Noah sat beside the fire. Alone, he looked up at the stars, not searching, just remembering, and he whispered, "We are still here, not perfect, not pure, but present." And far above, in realms without sky, the watchers, those who still wandered, heard him. They did not answer, but they turned away, because even the forgotten know when they are no longer invited. And in the earth beneath the fig tree's shadow, the fire sighed and slept again. The moon had grown heavy again. It hung low over the hills, not golden like wheat, but pale, as if it too had remembered something it wished it could forget. The fig tree cast a long shadow, and beneath it Ham stood alone. His seed pouch rested on his palm, still unopened. The others had left. Shem had gone east, raising dwellings where the rivers sing. Japheth had followed the stars northward, carving paths with kindness and firelight. But Ham had stayed, not because he was faithful, because something still held him here. Looked down at the seed. It pulsed faintly in the moonlight, almost breathing, but he could not plant it, not yet, because the ground beneath him still felt like it remembered who he had once been. Noah watched from the tent's opening. His eyes lined with more than age, lined with the weight of knowing that obedience is not inherited. That night he prayed longer, not for protection, for remembrance, because the next test would not come with rain, it would come with blood. The morning dawned gray, not storm gray. Dusk gray, like the color of bones, turned to silence. Noah woke early. He felt it before he saw it, a trembling in the wind, a dissonance in the birdsong, and then a scream from the east. He ran barefoot through the fields of young barley toward the hill where the animals were kept. There, kneeling in the dust, was Canaan, Ham's son, his tunic torn, his hands covered in red. Noah's heart cracked. What happened? Canaan looked up, eyes wild with terror, mouth open but no words. Behind him a ram lay still, its throat opened clean, not butchered, slain. Noah moved to his side, held his face, waited for the boy's breath to return, and then a whisper. He told me to. Noah froze. Who? But Canaan would not say. He only pointed to the edge of the trees where the shadows clung longer than they should. That night Noah sat with Ham. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally Noah asked, "What have you taught your son?" Ham looked into the fire. "To be strong." "And what did you leave out?" Ham didn't answer because he knew. He had told the boy of greatness, of glory, of old blood and tall ancestors who walked like kings. He had spoken of the Watchers, not as curse but as might. He had called them the first guardians, the true light. Whispers passed down not through scripture but through silence, through hunger. And Canaan had listened. Noah rose, stepped out into the night, and looked to the stars. He called his Lord softly. "Do not let the fire return through the children." Because what the flood had drowned, the tongue could resurrect. And what giants had carved in stone, men could speak again in secret. The boy wandered near the edge of the fig grove again, alone. Canaan, child of Ham, child of fire-pressed seed, child of the whisper that once came through shadow. He didn't look lost, he looked pulled. The same way smoke rises, the same way a prayer, even misformed, finds the ear of something. Noah watched from a distance, hands behind his back, head tilted in sorrow. The boy had been born after the flood, but walked like one who remembered it. There were questions in his eyes, not the kind that seek wisdom, the kind that seek permission, and the difference is everything. That evening Noah gathered his family. The fig grove stood behind them, tall and clean. He placed stones in the center, 12 again, and the 13th newly unburied. This time he spoke not to the men, but to the children. His voice was steady, low, the kind that lives in bone once heard. "There was once a brother," he began, "whose gift was refused, and instead of returning to his Lord, he took blood." The fire crackled beside him. No wind stirred. He did not kill a stranger. He killed one who had wept beside him as a child, who had shared his mother's food, who had sung with him in the olive fields. The children grew quiet. Even the smallest turned their eyes to him. And when the deed was done, the earth beneath him cried. It refused to hide the blood. It screamed to the heavens. Noah walked among the stones, soft steps, measured breath. From that day forward, blood was never just blood, it was echo, it was accusation. He looked to Canaan, who sat on the edge of the circle, hands clenched in his lap. "Do you know what makes a man cursed?" Canaan did not answer, but the wind did, a low groan through the branches, as if the trees themselves held memory. "It is not falling," Noah said. "It is refusing to kneel after." He sat down beside the 13th stone, touched its surface, cracked from time and trembling. "This one," he said, "marks the day my own hands built something that should never have bloomed. And when it bloomed, I burned it, but its roots still remember me." Silence wrapped the night like a shroud. Japheth whispered a prayer. Shem held his son's hand, but Canaan stood and walked away. Noah did not stop him, because even prophets cannot force the soul to bow. They can only point to the place where heaven listens. That night the earth trembled, not in quake, in whisper, as if 1,000 names once buried stirred in the soil and turned their faces upward. Noah woke before the dawn. He followed the groan beneath his feet, through the trees, beyond the grazing fields, past the bones of an altar no one prayed at anymore. There, in the place where stone met water, he found it, a carcass, fresh, untouched by beasts, its throat torn clean, not for hunger, not for survival, for ritual. And beside it, a mark drawn in ash, a single eye, wide open, crying upward. Noah fell to his knees, not in despair, in prayer. His voice cracked. "Yarab, I have taught them everything I remember. If they forget, let not the curse fall on them, let it fall on me." And the water beside the stone stilled, so still it looked like a mirror, and in it for just a moment he saw not his own face, but the shadow of one who once offered wheat and burned with jealousy. Cain, not alive, not returned, but remembered, because the curse that wears a brother's name is not in the blade, it is in the reason for lifting it, and the earth, though it holds the dead, will never hide the cry. The sun rose slow that morning, dragging its light behind it like robes soaked in sorrow. Noah returned to the camp in silence, ash still on his hands, his knees sore from the ground's refusal to comfort him. The others had not yet risen, except one, Ham. He stood by the fig tree, eyes closed, palms open, as if waiting for either wind or word. Noah approached, his steps softer than the light. Ham did not turn, but he spoke. "He's not like me." Noah paused, watched the fig tree sway. "No," he said, "he's not, but he carries what you never buried." Ham opened his eyes, and for the first time in many days they were clear. "What should I do?" Noah stepped closer, placed a hand on the bark between them. "Start where I did, speak to the one who still listens." That day Ham fasted. Not for atonement, for clarity, and Noah, he searched for Canaan. He walked the ridges where goats grazed, the stones where crows lingered. He followed the wind's curve down into the valley where dreams grow strange. And there he found him at the old altar, the one buried once, now uncovered again. The 13th stone sat in the center, re-erected, polished. A single black feather lay at its base, still warm. Canaan sat across from it, his eyes hollow, his lips whispering. Noah didn't interrupt. He waited long, then knelt. "Do you know who you're speaking to?" Canaan did not look at him. "To the ones who came before the flood." "And what do they say?" Canaan finally turned, his voice low, hoarse. "They say the fire was never meant to be drowned." Noah placed his staff on the ground. The fire wasn't drowned, it was offered a place to sleep, and sleep is mercy. Canaan's jaw tightened. "Then why does it speak louder than God?" The air held its breath. Noah reached forward, touched the stone. It hummed, faint, like a breath trying to become voice. "Because you're still listening to the scream, not the silence that came after." Canaan stood. "I want more than silence." "Then you must walk through it." They said no more. Noah did not strike the altar this time. He did not rebury the stone. He turned, walked, left the boy with the choice, because prophecy does not possess, it invites. That night Noah lit no fire. The camp sat in shadow. Ham returned to the fig tree, bowed low. His sons gathered behind him. Shem and Japheth spoke quietly of the stars. And Canaan, he did not return, but in the darkness beyond a branch snapped. A bird cried, and the 13th stone cracked once more, not broken, just divided, because sometimes the flood cannot reach the heart. And some flames, even when buried beneath a world of water, still wait for breath. They began to drift, not suddenly, not with malice, just distance. One by one, Noah's sons rose with the morning mist and walked in different directions, not out of rebellion, but out of need. The world had become too quiet for all their shadows to share the same soil. It was Shem who left first. His tent had always been closest to his father, but his eyes often looked eastward to where the sun first kissed the dust. He came to Noah before the birds had stirred. He did not speak of leaving, he spoke of building. There is a valley where the wind tastes like prayer. Noah nodded. Then build, but remember who taught the wind to speak. Shem kissed his father's forehead. His sons packed slowly, and before the sun reached its highest arc they were gone. Japheth left not long after, not for prayer, for wonder. The northern hills had always sung to him, with snow on their breath and silence that softened the spirit. I want my children to sleep under stars they've never seen, he told Noah. And Noah, with eyes damp, replied, then teach them that every star still bows even if we no longer do. And so Japheth walked northward, his laughter echoing faintly behind him until it was swallowed by trees. Ham did not leave, but he did not stay either. He wandered. His camp was near, but his presence was far. He hunted alone. He lit separate fires. He prayed, but not loudly. Noah saw the change, not in Ham's hands, in his silences. They grew heavier. They pressed against the camp like smoke with no visible flame. One night Noah called to him. They sat beneath the fig tree, the moon silver, the wind still. Noah began not with scripture but with memory. Do you remember the sound the ark made when it first lifted from the soil? Ham closed his eyes. It creaked like bones remembering how to breathe. Noah smiled faintly. Yes, that was the moment the earth let go. It trusted us. A pause. I wonder if it still does. Ham didn't reply. He only looked into the dark. Sometimes I think it remembers too much. Noah turned to him. That's why we were given memory, so the earth wouldn't carry all the pain alone. Silence followed, but not peace. A branch snapped in the distance. An owl shifted in the trees, and in Ham's chest the watcher's whisper stirred again, not with command, with invitation. Noah felt it too. He rose. You must choose. Ham frowned. Between what? Noah's voice was steady. Between being a son or being a story the earth must bury again. And then he left, because choice must not be forced, it must be felt. The earth was splitting again, not in anger but in remembering. Where once water had erased every path, now footsteps carved new ones. Shem's people moved with rhythm, their tents low, their prayers higher. They built with stone, but only after bowing to the soil. They sang softly in the mornings and let no wall rise higher than the sound of a whispered, "Oh my Lord." Their children carried water as if it were sacred, and they planted trees before they built homes. They did not forget. Japheth's people wandered farther. They made homes in wind-carved valleys, spoke many tongues, learned the patterns of stars like scripture. Their altars were few, but their generosity was vast. They smiled easily. They listened well. They remembered the flood not as punishment but as a great night of rebirth. They did not forget. Ham's line, however, was more difficult to trace. Some of them remained near, gentle, quiet, reverent, but others they whispered the names of giants again, not loudly, not in defiance, in curiosity. What strength did they have? What beauty was stolen from them? Why were they forbidden? And from curiosity a slow warmth, not the heat of fire, the heat of hunger. A hunger to remember what God had chosen to erase. Noah heard stories, a carving found in the hills, a cave where men sat in silence, staring at a wall etched with wings, a child born with eyes too deep who spoke dreams before she spoke names. He felt the old tremble in his knees, the way the sky had trembled before the first drop fell. He gathered the last of the family still near, Ham, Canaan, the younger ones. He unrolled the skin map he had drawn by hand. No borders, no kingdoms. Just mountains, rivers, and 12 circles, one for each virtue he had once named in stone. These are the places where prayer still lingers in the roots. He pointed to each one. Build near them, sleep beneath them, do not stray. But Canaan leaned closer, and what's there? He pointed to a patch in the far west, dark, unmarked. Noah's hand tensed. Nothing grows there, it is where the flood buried what refused to kneel. Canaan's eyes narrowed slightly. Curiosity again. Ham said nothing. He only folded the map when his father finished speaking, but Noah had seen enough. That night he returned to the fig tree. Alone, he carved a symbol into its bark. A circle split down the middle, on one side a single dot, on the other a question mark. Because sometimes legacy must be written where eyes can't see. He prayed beneath its branches. O you who parted sea from sea, part the hearts of those who wander, so that remembrance is never completely forgotten. The wind answered softly. The leaves rustled, then stilled. But deep in the distance, beyond the hills, a flame flickered, a small one, a campfire perhaps, or a torch, held by a hand that no longer feared the flood. The sky was still blue, the rivers still ran, children still played in the dust, but something had changed. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough. Enough for the birds to hesitate before landing. Enough for the earth to grow quiet beneath certain feet. Enough for the stars to blink slower, as if unsure where they were now shining. It began with a tower, a whisper first. We could reach him. Why wait for the word to descend when we can rise? The voice was not Ham's, nor Canon's. It was the voice of a man born many years after the flood, but whose veins pulsed with memory buried too deep to name. He did not speak like a tyrant. He spoke like a dreamer. And dreamers, when they forget who gave them breath, build monuments of bone and ash. He gathered many, men who remembered the giants not as abominations, but as ancestors. Women who braided their hair in the shapes of fallen stars. Children who carved the names of the watchers into clay and wore them on their necks. And they began to build not just a structure, an ascent. The tower was not only stone, it was prayer in reverse. A staircase not to heaven, but to pride. Noah heard of it. By then his hair had whitened like the mountain tops. His walk was slower, but his voice still carried the breath of warning. He rose, one last journey, eastward, where the smoke from the kiln blurred the sky. He stood at the base of the tower. It was high, so high the clouds circled it with suspicion. Men laughed from the scaffolds. Children ran messages up and down, as if carrying wisdom to heaven with their feet. Noah said nothing at first. He sat near the base, waited, and the dreamer came to him. Not a king, not yet, a man with eyes too bright and hands too smooth for someone building with stone. He bowed politely. Are you the prophet of the flood? Noah nodded. Then you understand the need for height. The man smiled. Safety, isn't that what your ark was? Noah looked up at the stone stretching above. My ark was built from obedience. This is not. The man knelt. But if he speaks from above, why not rise to hear him clearer? Noah's eyes darkened, not with rage, with sorrow. Because he is not a mountain, he is the one who made mountains kneel. Silence passed between them, dust curled in the wind, then the man stood. Still, you are welcome to watch. When it is finished, perhaps he will answer us from closer. And he turned. Noah remained. 3 days he prayed, he watched, he waited. Then the wind changed. It did not blow, it twisted. The scaffolds cracked. Voices grew loud, then confused. Men began shouting in tongues they could no longer understand. Hands pointed. Eyes widened. One language became many. One people became scattered sounds. The tower shuddered, not from collapse, from division. The breath of the Most High had passed through it, not in rage, in mercy. It had confused the tongues before the pride could settle, and that was enough. The builders dropped their tools. They did not bow. They did not cry. They simply forgot why they were building. The man who dreamed it into being looked down from the topmost stone, and his tears fell silently, not from defeat. From clarity, he descended, alone, and Noah was gone. He had walked west before dawn, carrying the last drawing he would ever make, a single vertical line, and across it a horizontal one, the cross of remembrance, the symbol of when man tries to rise where only humility belongs. He buried it beneath the fig tree and whispered, "Let them forget the tower, but not the warning." And in the distance, the unfinished monument stood crooked, like a finger once pointed at God, now broken. In the beginning, there had only been one tongue, a single thread, unbroken, stretched between breath and sky. It was the language of prophets, of mountains listening, of stars bowing in the night. It was not loud, it was not clever, it was pure, heavy, measured by reverence, not by speed. When Noah had spoken to his people, the air itself had seemed to carry his words into the chest like light poured into clay. There had been no confusion, only clarity, but now the voices had scattered like birds startled from prayer. Noah sat near the fig tree, old, still, silent. Children ran across the fields, chasing one another with laughter that rang sharp and unfamiliar. He could no longer understand all of it. Some called him Father. Others used names he had never taught. Some sang songs that twisted the rhythms of the old prayers. Others shouted chants he did not recognize. One boy, barefoot and wide-eyed, brought him a flower and said something with joy in his voice. Noah smiled, nodded, but the word had no root in his memory. He whispered under his breath, and so the flood begins again. Not of water, of meaning, because when tongues are divided, hearts follow, and when hearts divide, memory dissolves into myth. The tower had not fallen, but the language had. Split, multiplied, lost. He remembered the day it broke. How the men once bound by common breath suddenly stared at one another with eyes that no longer recognized the sound of belonging. He remembered the confusion, the panic, the silence that followed like a shadow too ashamed to speak. Even now, years later, the world hummed with that fracture. Nations were forming not from covenant but from sound. And Noah could only watch, because the tongue is a gift, but it is also a mirror. It reflects what the soul values most, and some had begun to use it not for remembrance but for reach, for glory, for pride. He called Ham one morning. They sat in the grove, the wind warm with warning. "You must teach Canaan the name of the one who breathes mercy." Ham nodded. "I have." Noah looked at him long. "Have you taught him to say it with awe or only to pronounce it?" Ham said nothing. Noah's voice lowered. "We do not lose the truth in one day. We lose it when we stop speaking it as if it's sacred." That night Noah wrote the name, not in ink, not in fire, in breath. He stood alone in the grove, faced the sky, and said it aloud. Yah-R, a letter 1E25M, a macron N. The wind slowed, the trees bowed, and the fig tree dropped one fruit, unbruised, full, whole. He picked it up, cradled it in both palms, and whispered, "Let this be the last word I still understand." Because even if tongues divide, even if prayers are forgotten, even if the name becomes foreign, mercy listens to the sound of longing, not just language. And the longing in Noah's chest still reached heaven. It wasn't just the words that changed. It was the way they held them. Once a name could silence the wind. Now it could be traded for gold, carved into stone not for worship but for fear. And that was the quiet fall. The flood had broken bodies, but broken speech that takes generations. Noah walked among the new tribes. Each had made their mark in the soil. Each spoke as if their voice alone shaped the sun. He stopped near a well where women drew water, humming songs that sounded like lullabies but held no memory of paradise. He offered them peace in the old tongue. They smiled, but their eyes held no recognition. He moved on. In a grove, two men argued. Their hands flew like birds, their voices thick with sounds sharp as flint. Noah stepped between them, raised his hand, spoke the word that had once ended wars. Letter 1E63UL, letter 1E25. Peace, but it landed empty. The men paused, narrowed their eyes, and returned to their quarrel as if God himself had not just spoken. Noah turned away. The trees felt farther, the ground unfamiliar. When words lose their sacred weight, the world becomes a stranger beneath your feet. At camp that night, he gathered the children, laid before them smooth stones. On each he wrote a single word, not with charcoal, with fingers pressing deeply into the dust. Letter 1E25, a QQ, truth. Sabal, path, dua, call, saber, endurance, amina, trust. He said each one aloud, once, clearly. Then placed the stone into the fire. The flames crackled, the dust darkened, but the meaning he hoped it would rise with the smoke. One boy, bright-eyed and curious, asked softly, "Are we the last to know?" Noah smiled, a tired, tender smile. "You are the last to remember, but not the last to be called." Another child pointed to the stars. "Do they speak our words?" Noah looked up. "They speak none, but they listen to hearts that do." Later he walked the riverbank alone. watched the water twist around rocks like lost prayers looking for somewhere to settle. He cupped his hands, lifted water, spoke the name again, Ya letter 1E25 a YY, O ever living. The water slipped through his fingers, but it did not fall like before. It danced, and he wept. Because even when man forgets, water still remembers. He carved no books. He left no temple. He whispered the name into trees, into wind, into the unborn seeds beneath the fig, so that when they sprouted, their leaves would shiver with it, so that even when men built towers again or wrote new gods with golden ink, somewhere in a breathless night, a breeze would pass through a child's dream and carry the syllables of truth, because sacred language never truly dies. It just waits for longing to speak again. Noah stood at the edge of a new land, one he had never walked before, one where the trees grew tall without asking for blessing and the wind spoke in accents he no longer understood. The people here were warm, they smiled easily, they offered him fruit, shelter, even song. But when he said the name, they tilted their heads, not in reverence, in confusion. And then they asked, "Is that your God's name?" Noah paused, his hands trembled. He had never been asked that before, not like that. Not with curiosity, but with polite detachment, as if God were a thing to be filed beside weather and soil. He answered softly, "No, that is not mine, that is theirs, the one before speech, before stone, before even the flood's first tear." They smiled again. They did not understand. That night Noah walked to the top of a small hill. The stars hung lower here. The air felt older. He knelt, pressed his forehead to the ground, and whispered every name he had ever used for the divine. Al-Wadad, Al-Raf, Al-Alam, Al-Sami, Al-Baki. He said them not in sequence but in sorrow, like a man emptying a satchel of seeds into the wind, praying just one will find soil. He wept, not for himself, for what was coming. He saw it in dreams now. People who would barter holiness for spectacle, build temples of noise, raise names not to praise but to rule. People who would teach their children only the letters, not the silence between them. And yet somewhere he also dreamed of a man, walking barefoot through a burning land, eyes full of thunder, heart full of mercy, carrying no book, just a breath. And that breath would shake the mountains, not by command, but by remembering the name in its full weight again. Noah awoke before dawn. He walked to the fig tree, bent low, placed his hand on the trunk. It was warm. A single fig had ripened. He plucked it, ate it slowly, each bite a prayer. Let even the fruit speak your name. His body had grown thin, his hair white as bone, but his soul, it pulsed like the flood had just ended. He called for Canaan. The boy had grown taller, quieter. He came, eyes low, heart heavy. Noah took his hand, placed a stone in it, the last one, smooth, round, heavy with years. You may not say the name like I do, but say it in your own way and let your deeds make the sound. Canaan said nothing, but his fingers curled around the stone as though it were the only thing left that still remembered him. And maybe it was. Noah turned to the earth, bent low, pressed his lips to the dust, and whispered, "If they forget, you remember." And the ground shivered, soft, gentle, like a sigh too sacred to be a wind, because the earth does not forget. The name written into mountain, into seed, into wave, still hums beneath the souls of every wandering man. And long after the prophets are gone, after towers rise and fall, after tongues split and scatter, a tree will grow, a stone will crack, a breeze will whisper, "He is still one." Noah did not die in the flood, but a part of him never left it. Even as the world blossomed again, even as rivers flowed and children sang, even as towers rose and tongues multiplied, he still heard the water, not around him, within. The sound of waves brushing against hollow wood, the echo of animals breathing in sync with the divine will, the hush that followed every prayer said during the storm. It never left him. The ark had been emptied long ago, its ribs dried by sun and memory, its beams weathered into silence. But one night Noah dreamed it again, whole, floating, not on water but in the sky. A great vessel made not of gopher wood but of remembrance. It moved above the clouds, carrying nothing but names. Names whispered by prophets, names forgotten by kings, Names once etched into the hearts of those who walked barefoot and bowed often. He awoke in tears, not of sorrow, of clarity, because he understood now the ark had not been a boat, it had been a covenant in motion. And perhaps it had never landed, perhaps it still moved, but not through water, through hearts. He rose before dawn, walked slowly toward the mountain's base. Each step soft, each breath an offering. At the clearing where the ark had once rested, there was nothing now, just grass and wind, but he saw it. With the eyes only the faithful are given at the end. He knelt, pressed his forehead to the ground one last time, and whispered the first prayer he had ever said, "O you who carried me, carry them." He sat there long, the mountain behind him, the rising sun before him, the memory of the ark all around him. Ham found him later, still, peaceful. Eyes closed, not gone, returned, not vanished, lifted, because some prophets do not pass into death, they are folded into the breath of the one they called by name. That night the wind shifted, birds flew in strange circles, children spoke softer, and the fig tree dropped 7 fruits without ripening. Japheth returned from the north, Shem came from the east. They stood beside the mountain, beside the place where their father had once whispered eternity into the soil, and they did not weep. They built no tomb, raised no stone. They left the place open so that the sky could visit it, so that the ark, wherever it was, could return again, not with wood but with memory. And still it moves, even now, above cities, above prayers, above the breath of those who whisper his name just before sleep. The ark never ended, it was only carried upward. And in that silence, every soul still waiting for rain feels the hum of it just beneath the stars. The story of Noah faded from the tongues of men, but not from the soil. The wind still whispered his name across ridges where no tents stood, and trees bent softly when the fig branches trembled with the memory of his touch. In the generations that followed, people spoke of the flood like it was myth, a bedtime tale for children, a warning etched into stone but never the heart. But the ark, the real ark, had never been left behind, because it had never been a thing of timber alone. It had been a shape written in obedience, carried by mercy and lifted by longing. And such a thing cannot rot, it can only rise. Shem would speak of it softly to his children. It was not the size of the vessel that saved us, it was the size of his surrender. Japheth would say, the ark wasn't a place, it was a pause between forgetting and remembering. Ham rarely spoke of it, but he would stare at the stars in silence, and sometimes he'd murmur, "I think it still passes over us, at night." And perhaps it does. Perhaps it never stopped moving, just shifted form. Maybe it became the rhythm of the sea, the cradle of a newborn's first breath, the space between thunder and rain, the hush in the soul just before it calls out, "O God, carry me." Because the ark was never a boat, it was the answer to the prayer not yet spoken. A shelter for what was still sacred when the world had traded reverence for ruin. It held more than animals, it held names, futures, songs unborn, silences yet to be broken. And now it holds us, not as passengers, but as inheritors. Every act of mercy, every word spoken in truth, every time the voice softens instead of sharpens. That is the ark. Every time someone chooses to kneel rather than climb, to forgive rather than rise, that is the ark. And when a soul feels like it is drowning in a world that no longer prays, when the heavens feel far and the waters rise in the chest, the ark whispers, "You were never meant to walk. You were meant to be carried." So they tell stories still, in the desert, in the mountains, in the forests where no man speaks the same tongue anymore. And in those stories, the ark always finds a way to return. Sometimes in dream, sometimes in a child's drawing, sometimes in the shudder that comes in the moment of surrender, and always, always with the sound of water softly remembering wood. The last time the wind spoke Noah's name, it was not loud. It was not the storm that once split the sky in judgment. It was not the surge that lifted the ark from trembling earth. It was a whisper, soft, warm, almost shy. As if even the elements now knew that Noah had returned to the place beyond sound. They say the ark dissolved, that the wood faded into the bones of the mountain, that no splinter was ever found. no iron nail uncovered, and they are right, but not because it was lost, because it was never meant to remain. Holy things leave no footprints. They pass through the world like rain through light. And so it was with Noah. He did not leave a temple, no golden monument, no sword, no crown. He left stillness. The kind that enters a soul only when it stops chasing. The kind that falls over the heart when a man realizes he does not need to build anything higher, he only needs to kneel lower. His sons buried no relics. They only pointed to the mountain and said, "He went up, and so must we." But they did not mean height. They meant surrender. They meant silence. They meant the ark. It said that on certain nights when the stars hang heavy and the earth holds its breath, you can hear it, the creak of wood. Low sound of animals breathing together, the rustle of wings, the whisper of water gliding beneath a vessel not made by hands. And if you close your eyes, you will feel it, the ark still moving, still carrying, still remembering, because somewhere a soul has cried out again, "I am drowning." And the ark always returns for those who remember how to call, not with eloquence, not with power, but with a single trembling breath that says, "Oh my Lord, save me." That is enough. That has always been enough. So if tonight your soul is tired, if the flood within you has risen too high, if the voices no longer understand your pain, do not build a tower. Do not try to rise, bow, whisper. Let the ark find you in the stillness, because it never stopped floating. It only waits for the ones who remember. Long after Noah was gone, the clouds still watched, not with grief, not with fear, with patience. Because the sky always knew the flood would come again, not with water, not with drowning, with forgetting. And forgetting in the eyes of heaven is the greater flood. Generations passed, new names filled the earth, new scripts carved into stone, new stories told beside fire. But beneath every tongue, every flag, every blade of grass, the memory remained, hidden, thin as breath, faint as the last ripple in a sea after the storm has walked away. Somewhere deep in the east, a shepherd stood under an open sky. He looked up, felt the air shift. He did not know Noah, did not know the ark, did not know the sound of wood creaking beneath divine mercy. But still he shivered. Somewhere in the west, a woman knelt at a grave. She whispered a name not written in any book, not passed from father to son, only heard once in a dream she could never forget. She pressed her hands to the soil, felt it warm, and wept. Somewhere else, in the middle of a vast city carved from fire and stone, a child awoke with tears. He had seen something, a mountain covered in rain, a door that would not open, a voice that called out from behind silence. He asked his mother, "Did we ever live in a boat?" She laughed gently. "No, my love, that's only a story." But the boy did not forget, because the ark still sails. It sails across generations, across silence, across the trembling inside those who have almost forgotten how to bow. And the rain, it still waits, not the flood, not the wrath, but the rain that awakens, the kind that falls not on the ground but on the heart. It comes gently, one drop at a time. A memory returned in the middle of the night, a voice heard in a moment of quiet, a question that breaks pride open like thunder cracks stone. Who am I without him? That is the new flood, that is the mercy. And when it comes, you will not need a vessel, you will not need a prophet, you will only need stillness. And the remembrance that once, a long time ago, someone prayed for you before you were ever born, someone named Noah. Someone who stood when the world was forgetting and begged God not to let the memory be washed away. You are that memory, still breathing, still watching the sky, still waiting for the rain that does not fall to drown but to return you to Him. There is a kind of rain that does not fall from clouds. It falls from silence, from pauses between prayers, from the closing of eyes when no words come, from the still ache that remains when every door seems shut except the one that opens inward. This is the rain that will fall again, not to wash the world but to soften it, not to punish but to awaken. And its signs have already begun, not in disasters, not in earthquakes or fire, but in the quiet we cannot escape. A young man surrounded by noise, screens, endless motion suddenly stops, sits alone, and feels something ancient press against his chest. He does not know the word for it, but his soul does. It is the weight of the flood without the water. It is the memory of the ark without the boat. A mother rocking her child in the middle of the night hears the wind brush the window and pauses. She remembers her grandmother's stories, the ones told in hushed tones, of a man who built when others mocked, who cried out when others laughed, who was saved not by strength but by surrender. Without knowing why, she whispers, "Ya Allah, carry us too." Somewhere far, a prisoner lays awake, chains heavy, past darker than the cell, but he closes his eyes and sees wood, endless water, a dove. He sees hope with wings, and he knows he is not beyond the flood. He is still within it, but the ark still moves, even through prison walls, even through shame, even through lifetimes of forgetting. Because God never drowns a soul that still remembers how to call. And what is the rain that falls again? It is not judgment, it is not wrath. It is the voice that says, build again, not with wood, with remembrance. Build a place inside you that does not sway when the world shifts, that does not rot when the years pass. Build the ark in your sujud, in your silence, in your trust. And know this: when the final rain falls, when time itself bows, those who carry the ark inside will not need a vessel. They will already be floating, on mercy, on surrender, on the prayers of a prophet long gone, whose breath still echoes across the waters of the soul. What if the rain never comes again? What if the sky remains dry and the earth stays still? What if no voice splits the heavens? No command is given, no ark is needed. Will you still build? Will you still carve a door with your prayers? Lay down beams with your patience? Seal the cracks with the tears you refuse to show anyone? Because perhaps that is what God was always asking. Not, will you survive? But, will you remember? Not, can you hear me in the storm? But, can you still feel me in the silence? Noah did not build because it was raining. He built because he trusted the one who said it would. He built when the sun burned, when the crowds mocked, when the land was thirsty and the sky quiet. And maybe that's the flood we face now. Not of water, but of disbelief. Not of drowning, but of forgetting how to kneel without reason. There are no more animals lining up. No more mountain altars. No more thundered warnings, but there are hearts. Hearts that beat like hooves against the door of mercy. Hearts that know something is coming even if they cannot name it. And in these hearts the ark still floats, invisible, unseen, but real. There are those who carry it to work, to school, into their marriages, into their solitude, not as a burden but as a whisper that says, stay dry in your devotion. Do not let the world soak your soul. Wait, watch, build. Because the rain that will fall again may not touch the skin. It may fall only on the one who opens their hands in secret and says, "O my sustainer, I am ready. Build through me, float me through what is coming." And maybe, just maybe, that is enough to summon the sky. Maybe the flood now is not water, it is mercy. Rushing, rising, not to destroy but to carry, not to drown but to lift. And those who carry the ark inside, those who remember when all else forgets, those who build when there is no sign, they will not fear the rain. They will rise with it, softly, silently, like prayer, like breath, like the last line of a forgotten psalm, and the world will not understand, but they will float. Because once a man named Noah built an ark in silence, and it never stopped sailing, not through water but through hearts, even yours, even now, even here. And if the silence never broke, would your faith still rise in the dark? Let the story rest now. Close your eyes. Let the ark carry you into the night.